Lies and myths in InfoSec. So calling out bullshit when I see it is became kind of my brand when I got on Twitter and I started getting involved in community efforts and things like that. And a lot of the projects that I've done have been based on, um, I mean, for me, it's understanding how things actually work, and bullshit just gets in the way of that. So when I spot that, I try and call it out. Earlier in my career, maybe I did it without much tact, and that's how I've grown as a person. Is I can now do it with a little bit more tact, and I try and handle things quietly before I just post bullshit or call bullshit publicly on Twitter, LinkedIn, or wherever, or do a talk on it. So this is kind of the sum of some work that that has been going on for, see, how many years has it been since 2017, 2016, 2017? Yeah, 6 or 7 years. So let's dive into it. I actually didn't have an about me slide in here until 10 minutes ago, and I figured, okay, I might as well throw something in there. I mentioned community stuff. I founded and am one of the main organizers for B-Sides Knoxville, which just had our ninth year, which I'm very proud of how that event has grown. We had something like 370 people there this year. Host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast, which is 2.5, 3 hours of live podcast every week, except for weeks with federal holidays. So we actually skipped this week, which is great because it would have made this week really tough. I'm in a hotel room, as you can probably tell, and I'm traveling for a wedding, and it would have been very tough to do on the road. Also the director of product marketing at Valence Security, and you can find me at Zawaba most places. If that's not enough information for you, Adrian Sanabria is a very easily searchable name, so you weirdos can find out more if you want. Just Google me. All right, so why are these even a thing? Why do we even have to deal with myths and lies? This is something I wanted to understand, because I think it's important to know, especially when you're dealing with it and you're responding to it. A lot of people are just very allergic to bullshit and are very quick to leap on someone. And a lot of times it's not malicious. It's not, there's some laziness. Maybe they just retweeted what somebody else said because they trusted that person. A lot of the time, I think you know, the internet coming to beat somebody up over something incorrect they said is unwarranted, and it's unhelpful too. And it's a much better approach to come at it with empathy. you know and on the flip side, anytime you retweet something, anytime you're kind of in the hot seat, it's good to handle that with grace. Also, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, what you posted is actually a myth, and it's been disproven over here, and there's all kinds of evidence for why this isn't a thing. So try not to get defensive. Try to be graceful when you receive that, and also try to have empathy when you're giving that feedback. And like I said, I try and do it with more tact. I try and be, privately, I'll DM somebody, tell them something maybe they didn't know about and how it can be harmful and cause problems. And yeah, so InfoSec is already challenging enough. We don't really need to make up anything about how damaging it can be, about how difficult it can be, of all that. It's already pretty challenging. It does cause a lot of damage, but we'll get into some of the details on that, some of the research I've done. And yeah, objectively, they're huge. Are they the biggest thing ever? No. And I see that all the time. That's one of those myths, is that cybersecurity is the biggest problem. It is not. Much bigger than that. Fraud is probably bigger than cybersecurity in terms of direct losses. CEOs losing their mind and taking the company in a different strategic direction is probably far more damaging and contributes to more direct losses and business failures than any cybersecurity attacks. So I think it's important to put things in perspectives. Like we need to be, honest with ourselves, intellectually honest with ourselves, and say, okay, maybe it's not the biggest thing ever, and it shouldn't be everyone's biggest priority, but it's still a pretty important thing. It's still pretty big, and we should be able to live with that, because I think that's the truth, and provably true. So why pretend that things are even worse? Also, I have no idea where the ostrich theme comes from. It's just, I don't know, divine inspiration. I don't know what to chalk it up to. I was looking for a theme for this talk, and ostriches just hit me. I don't know. All right, let's see. So reason number one, comfort. A lot of people, if you're in this industry, you're already looking for these kinds of things that make you feel better about what you're doing, make you feel pride. And something I think is kind of funny here, there's this term called hope cycling, where even though people know like the number on their plastic doesn't match up with something that their recycler recycles, they'll put it in a recycle bin anyway, just because it makes them feel better because they're not putting it in the trash, even though they're probably making their job harder, even though even the correctly numbered stuff is 9 times out of 10 going to go to a landfill anyway. There's this and there's a lot of emotions in here, cognitive biases that just cause us to do kind of these silly human things, like hope cycling. So yeah, we're kind of in a vulnerable state here, and it's good to be actively aware of that. Also, from a business standpoint, it's easy to call out businesses who fake it, who are clearly not doing what they're claiming, or not living up to those claims. But it's tough. It's tough to build a business. There's over 4,000 cybersecurity businesses, and you've got to get people to notice you. And a lot of companies will over exaggerate, the quality of their product, the capabilities of their product. Um, there's always going to be some element of fake it till you make it. And I feel like that's okay to a point. I strongly believe, and I love studying cases like Theranos, where companies obviously go too far, or like the Segway is a great case study where they didn't intend for the hype to get out of control. If you read about how that happened, a lot of it had to do with the book that was being written as they were building the product and before they revealed what the product was. And it's and if you study that story, the book is really interesting and devotes one chapter at the very end to how the hype got out of control. But it was unintentional. In the case of Theranos, I think there was certainly a point where she wanted to legitimately thought she could build this product, and thought maybe, okay, I'll fake it for a little bit until we can make the science work, until we can get the tech there. And at some point, there is that point where you cross the line and you say, well, fuck it, I've come this far. Like, I have to keep going. I can't admit defeat. And it's just a personality type where, it goes from fake it till you make it to just straight up fraud. And it's amazing how far things went in that case. And then the reason there's so much of it, and the reason I undertook some of this work, is the burden of proof is really tough. You'll see a lot of, there's kind of a wide margin between like your Verizon DBIR, your security papers that are heavily referenced, where the data is available, where it's maybe closer to academic research, and then you've got the vendor annual report, which I just completed one with Valence. And what's handy there is we were the primary source of the data. A lot of the data came from our own customers. But But there's definitely stuff in between there where, there's some claims being made that can't really be backed up, and they're almost impossible to back up because the data isn't available. You can't really go check on it. And that's just kind of frustrating. You have to kind of take somebody's word for it. And in some cases, a lot of these claims are really, really tough to swallow. So this is a bit of a tease that will go on throughout this talk. You can see if you can figure out what the pattern is that I'm mapping out here. But I'm going to build a timeline over the course of this talk. And I've kind of danced around it, but confirmation bias is one of those cognitive biases that's kind of at the core of this. It's really easy to fall in love with a snappy soundbite or a stat or something that looks like a fact that just perfectly mates with the product you're trying to promote or the talk that you're going to give next month. And it's just the perfect thing to drop into a slide in a sales deck or in a talk. And the temptation is not to check up on it and validate it because it's so perfect. And this is actually a business in our industry. There are organizations that do nothing but come up with fake stats and stuff like that that perfectly fit into people's sales decks and slide decks. So, and this is not the last we'll hear from Dr. Feynman. I like to quote Dr. Feynman because he has a lot of great quotes on this. And this is just kind of this, again, especially when you're posting stuff, even if it's as simple as retweeting something, it's just always good to have the skepticism, even in your own beliefs, just in the back of your mind, just keeping you honest. Another one is sunk cost. This is another fallacy that comes into play here where, imagine that you're selling a product and you had this quote or this stat in your sales deck and you've been using it for a year, for 5 years, and all of a sudden you find out that stat is fake. And every person you've ever presented that to, essentially you've given them bad information. Like, imagine how that feels. Imagine, again, this is where that line is drawn, where I see a lot of folks decide, fuck it, I'll keep using it. I hope it's okay to swear here, because I'm probably gonna keep doing it. So, but yeah. So some of these stats these fake stats that I'm gonna show today, face to face, people have been told, that these are disproven, they're fake stats, and these people keep using them. And that's when I lose respect for them. That's when they cross over from, potentially just ignorant of the facts to just straight up fraud. And this, unfortunately, is altogether too true. I've had this experience where I retweeted something without checking it first, and you can't take it back. Like I'll the thing that I retweet or the thing that I say that's incorrect will get 250,000 engagements, and then my retraction will get 1,000. Right? Like at less than 1% of the engagement for the oops, sorry, I was wrong about this. And you just can't stop it. It just, stuff like that tends to go viral. So again, very important to have that degree of skepticism, even in your own stuff, your own thoughts, how you're thinking about stuff. Go get some reality checks, ask other people, as excited as you are, do a quick Google search before you retweet that thing or read the article. Like, that's the thing we don't do anymore, right? Is actually read the article before retweeting something. So why? Why should we care about this? Should we just ignore it? And the reason I chose not to ignore it is I do think it hurts our industry's credibility. We're not a professionalized industry. You don't need a license to practice cybersecurity. And I think we've been busted crying wolf quite a bit. There have been a lot of cases where we claimed something was way worse than it was, and people have noticed. That okay, you were saying I'm going to get hacked and the business is going to go under, and it hasn't happened. So what the hell? Why should I trust anything that you tell me? And this is an excellent case of one of those where an incorrect number is thrown out there. SANS threw out this number, and they pulled it back very quickly, but not quickly enough. That's all it takes often. Like 10 years later, you'll still see this tweet in people's slide decks. Somebody took a screenshot of this even after they pulled the tweet. This is probably still in somebody's sales deck somewhere, or maybe 1,000 people's sales decks somewhere. So the damage is done. And $2.9 billion per minute for bonus points here at CircleCityCon. See if you can figure out what that comes out to per year. Somebody whip out a calculator, because I have no idea, but I'm sure it's a hilarious number. Or maybe even like per week or a day. How many minutes are there in a day? That's a lot. That's very quickly gets up into the trillions. I think that's over $1 trillion a day, right? So like I said, credibility. I think this is a very delicate and tenuous thing for our industry, and all the reason we have to make sure what we're saying is true and accurate. I think the most dangerous thing here with some of the bad stats and some of the myths that are out there can lead entire categories or efforts on the defender side in the wrong direction if you're working on the wrong things, because you believe these stats that, hey, here's this is the most important thing everybody should be working on, and it's not the case. So that's one of the biggest things I worry about. Is already as an industry we're struggling. We don't see the numbers of breaches and attacks trending down at all, and we still have a long way to go, and we're not going to get there if we're constantly running off in the wrong direction. And the truth is often way more interesting than the myth or the fake stat. I learn a lot of interesting things when I dive into these stats that I would, in these myths, that I would argue is way more interesting than the myth itself. There's a lot to learn by doing that. 1440 minutes in a day. So how many $1 billion is that meltdown? What was the number? It was $2.9 billion per minute times 1440. So interesting story here, and this is one of the things that kicked off a lot of my research. It's not all one company, but there's one in particular that's behind most of the fake stats. They've almost consolidated and cornered the industry on coming up with fake stats. And it's the company that you'll hear quoted saying cybercrime will cost the world 10.5 trillion annually by 2025, and it's been 6 trillion in the past, 3 trillion. And when we look at the actual numbers, there are many studies on both direct and indirect losses from cybercrime, and they are all orders of magnitude smaller than any of these claims. So this is something that's not even defensible. You can go out, you can find studies. I think there's even one meta study of studies on losses from cybercrime, and well, not just cybercrime, but incidents in general. So including accidents and losses due to mistakes and accidents and things like that as well. And yeah, doesn't come even close. and the numbers don't even make sense. If you look at the world economy, if we're losing that much due to cybercrime, it would be completely different state of the market if that were true. And they're also the ones behind this number, which is not defensible, the 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. Of course, there are unfilled jobs. They're not nearly that high. And in fact, they've been trending down quite a bit. And the losses have been trending down in terms of direct losses. We actually saw ransomware drop from, it got close to $1 billion lost in I think that's globally. That number is from, I'm going to blank on the name of the company, but the company that tracks all the blockchain transactions. Somebody will know it. What is the name of it? It evades me. But yeah, we went down. We got close to $1 billion in 2021, and in 2022, I think it was just over $500 million of direct losses from ransoms paid. And then this one in particular, we'll talk about a little bit more. 60 Chainalysis. It's Chainalysis. Yeah, thank you, Alan. Gartner Norse. Yeah, Chainalysis is the one. They put out that report earlier this year. So 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a data breach. You'll see this all over the place. And I don't think we're not going to get into that just yet. We'll revisit that here in a moment. But there's a tried and true process here. And again, burden of proof makes this pretty easy for anyone to just make up a stat. Especially if you're, the company that's guilty of a lot of this is a PR firm. So they specialize in publishing stuff on Forbes and popular online media outlets, LinkedIn, social media, all those places. So they're basically experts at spreading that fake stat or spreading that myth in as many places as possible. And what's really kind of malicious here is you'll see recursive citations where they'll have like a white paper or some kind of annual report that then references their own Forbes article. And then that Forbes article will reference their annual report. You start following these references and you realize there's no methodology, there's no source for data, there's no raw data behind this. It's just a fake stat that points back and forth to a bunch of locations. And even some really big companies, you'll see, in the past, Symantec, more recently, places like IBM falling for this and including these stats in their reports. And yes, profit is the last one there. They do make a lot of money off of doing this. Putting together those papers, selling reprint rights to those papers. This is a business. Fake stats is a business in cybersecurity. And yeah, this is a direct quote from them. They brag about being featured and quoted by hundreds of media outlets, vendors, academia. It does make its way into academia, which should catch this kind of stuff, but they don't. There are several bills that were passed in Congress, partially because of fake stats, like the 60% of small businesses. You can argue that there's a bill, small business cybersecurity bill, that was passed because of that fake stat. So yeah, you find it everywhere. And yeah, just included this bit about this. This is much darker, but yeah, basically this guy, I think any of us, especially if there are any hardware hackers here, anybody like that, you can take a look at this and you can say, yeah, there's nothing in there that's going to detect a bomb. But this guy managed to make 50 million pounds selling these things. It just looks like a handle with a telescoping antenna plugged into it, convincing people it's going to detect car bombs and IUDs and selling it to countries where that's a problem. But in InfoSec, a little bit less dramatic, but still a lot of Still a lot of bad, negative outcome from these lies. All right, we continue the timeline here. So getting back to that 60% of small businesses stat, this actually kicked me off on a research project that I'm still continuing today. And still on a regular basis, this tweets from about a year ago, somebody saying, hey, where does this stat come from? Every year I see somebody spot this somewhere and ask about it. It shows up multiple times a week. I have basically a search set up that notifies me every time this stat is used, and it's constant. And the source of the fake stat still uses it today, still promotes it today. So first of all, you look at the stat and you're like, okay, so 60% of all small businesses who have a breach go out of business. So first of all, like we do have data on breaches that happen, and we can determine what percentage of those are small businesses, and we can see if they go out of business afterwards. Like the data's there. It's not easy to pull all that together, but it took me maybe an hour using public sources to say, okay, if this was true, we'd probably be seeing thousands and thousands of small businesses, like 2,000 to 3,000 small businesses going out of business every year. And we don't at all. Nothing even close to that. And I couldn't find any source for this data. I couldn't find, at least I couldn't find any raw data. I couldn't find, the original source for a long time, and started looking for the source and found, well, so that's a different story. I guess I get to that in a second here, but this also inspired me to put together this data set of all the companies that have ever gone out of business due to a breach. This is actually, it's 24 now. I forgot to update this. But my destroyed by breach data set lists every company that went out of business as a direct result of a cybersecurity incident of some kind. So it could be them having an open S3 bucket, nothing malicious, just an accident, so basically anything you'd find in like the Verizon data breach report. Could be cybercrime. A lot of the more recent ones were the result of ransomware, where their data was destroyed. They weren't able to recover the data. They went out of business as a result. But yeah, at most it's been like 2 or 3 businesses a year. So this is 23, now 24 companies all time that have gone out of business due to this. Not the 2,000 to 3,000 a year we would expect to see if this stat was true. So very quickly, well, and not very quickly, it took me a while to put together this data set. A lot of people helped. A couple times a year, I go through and I update it, and I ask people on all my networks, hey, have you seen any companies go out of business due to a cybersecurity event? Help me make sure this thing is as up to date as possible. Could I be missing a few? Sure. Maybe I'm missing, let's say I'm missing half of them. Okay, now it's 46. It's still not 2,000 to 3,000 a year, right? Like this list would be tens of thousands if this stat were true. And when you look at that list, you'll find a lot of these companies, like some of these companies had 2 employees. So it doesn't matter how small the business is. When your local media outlet sniffs this out and finds out that a company got hacked and went out of business because of it, you'll find, regardless of where it is, like it's a big story and people will jump on it. So I'm fairly certain that most of the companies that have gone out of business due to an event like this, we have made it into the media. Yeah, I think we've got spicy pickle restaurants in here, for God's sakes. So it came from, there's this collaboration between the National Cybersecurity Alliance, who every single year puts out a post that says, this is a bad stat, don't use it. Every year they repost that over and over again, and they can't get people to stop using it. But they were the original source, something they collaborated with Symantec on, and we know who it came from. Yeah, so here's the Here's the one from last May. Every year they do a press release. And Joseph Marks over at, what was this outlet? This was NextGov, actually tracked down the source and interviewed him and said, hey, this is, where'd you get this fake stat? And the guy just said, I thought I remembered somebody saying it, but I don't remember who said it. Basically, it sounded good in his head, and he made it up on the spot, and it made it into this publication, and the rest is history. And this is back in 2011. And again, the thing I really have a problem with is even after Joseph Marks, this is back in May 2017, confronted him about it, the source of this fake stat, the guy's still using it. It still shows up in his, I think the last time I saw him use it was just like a month ago, something like that, on his own blogs, his own publications. So just as popular now. The press releases they put out isn't putting a stop to it. It's almost impossible to kill off some of these myths and stats once they get that widely populated. And like I said, that one company makes money off of doing this, and this is one of the fake stats that they have adopted, and they put into every one of their reports. They're publicizing it constantly. I can't compete with that. I could give this talk at every cybersecurity conference, and still their SEO on every place that they put this fake stat is going to beat me. Yeah, and here's the NIST Small Business Cybersecurity Act is the legislation that came out of this bad stat. Probably not bad legislation, but it's not based on real information or real data. All right, so that is what this timeline has been. If you guessed it, this is a timeline of all the companies that have gone out of business due to a cyber event, some kind of data loss or cyber criminal hacking them. And yeah, 2019, that was a busy year. We lost a lot that year, and I think a lot of those were ransom. That's when ransomware and extortion cases started getting really, really bad. So a few other things I wanted to share here. We're talking about myths and lies, so it's not all about fake stats, but there's a couple sayings in the industry that are kind of used in the same way. And I don't like them because, first of all, I don't think they're true. And second of all, they're not really helping push anything forward. And one of these is attackers only need to get it right once. Defenders have to get it right every time, which is really only true for that initial foothold. So sure, an attacker is going to get an initial foothold, but once you get a foothold into an environment, you're in the defender's playground. You're flying blind. You have no idea how that environment's going to be set up. You don't know if there are deception traps placed all over the place. You don't know if you're in a fake environment. You have no idea what's going on. So attackers are depending on the environment to look exactly like they expect it to look like. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it does. So, I think this is something that, if we flip it around and we say, look, attackers only need to get it right once, and then they have to get it perfect every single time. I think that gives us a place to go. That gives us some hope, some motivation, to cling on to. Defenders should be using their knowledge and their control of their own environment against attackers, and that should be more the focus there. And that should drive us forward. And then it's not if you get hacked, it's when. So this is another thing that's kind of driven by these fake stats where, we hear about, when you hear 60% of all small businesses that have been, that have had a breach go out of business within 6 months, it certainly sounds like it's inevitable that it's going to happen to everybody. But the truth is, honestly, there just aren't, until they learn to use LLM AI to automate things, there just aren't enough attackers out there to make this true. And we see a few thousand breaches every year. A big percentage of those have no cyber criminal element. They're just accidents, they're mistakes, where somebody exposed some data accidentally and a researcher found it or a customer found it. So it's almost impossible without some kind of automation, which is something I'm concerned about. Things like auto GPT, I think are kind of concerning in terms of whether or not malicious actors could fully automate some of these breaches and types of attacks. Then humans are the weakest link. This is a really poor excuse, I think, for bad design and bad architecture and bad planning. We know humans make mistakes. They're not the weakest link. They're the most reliably insecure link that we have. And knowing that, I think there's a little excuse for, well, somebody clicked the link. I mean, what'd you expect to happen? Right? So this is just, I think this is a very lame excuse where we just need to get by this. And yeah, they had an excellent interview on my podcast with Lisa Plagemeyer, who said humans are reliably unreliable. And I love that quote from her. And yeah, we need to design and plan for that, clearly. Oh, we got some numbers here. $2.9 billion a minute, 174 trillion an hour. Is that trillion? What comes after a trillion? A quadrillion? 4 quadrillion a day. Is that right? That's million, billion. No, that's trillion. 4.1 trillion a day. It's hard to read that many zeros. Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for doing the math. The GDP of Earth is 96 trillion? Yeah. 15.7 GDPs of Earth. That's great. Love it. Thank you, Brian. All right. So summarizing here, and feel free to, I haven't really been able to keep track of the chat here, but I'll definitely be able to take some questions. I hope everybody's had a chance to check out some of the links that were in there. I did put together some bit.ly links to make them easier to copy out, but I can paste them into the chat also. But yeah, wrapping up here, the reason I'm giving this talk, I want people to, there's just some good habits to have, right? If you have a LinkedIn, Twitter account, Mastodon, if you're writing papers, if you're blogging, if you're putting anything out there, these are just things that we need to have as we put stuff together and be responsible about the stuff that that we're telling people that look to us for whether you want to call it thought leadership or people learning the industry. We need to be honest with both the public here and folks coming into our industry on truly what the problems are, how bad they are, things like that. So healthy skepticism is number one. When you're actually looking at a paper, and you're deciding whether to share this with the rest of your team or to share it on your Twitter and your LinkedIn to promote it, look for the methodology. Is there any source data behind these claims? And for the motivational maxims, I think each of these, the examples I shared, pretty easy to flip those, make them more hopeful, make them more useful, make them even something that we can use to guide us to better approaches, better security. And yeah, if you find yourself digging into something, you spend a bunch of time hunting down a fake stat, share the data, put it out there somewhere. DBIR folks are great to work with. The VERAS database, which is on their GitHub, is a great source of data if you want to do any analysis yourself. And it's huge. I think it's close to 1 million records at this point. And huge data set, and they're wonderful to work with. Sometimes I read the Verizon DBIR, I have a question. Oftentimes they get back to me same day. they've cut custom queries for me. I wanted to dig into a stat further. Wonderful, wonderful people over there with Alex Pinto and his team. And dealing with it when you find it, like I said in the beginning, approach it with empathy. Don't assume somebody's trying to pull one over, or trying to promote a fake stat. They may not know. Try to take a helpful approach to it. And in your own stuff, include references. It drives me nuts when I'm looking at a survey and I'm wondering, okay, did you survey 20 CISOs or 20,000 or 2,000? If that number isn't in there, it's not really helpful, because I don't know if this is representative of the whole industry or just Philadelphia. You need that kind of context for a lot of stats to be useful and a lot of reports to be useful. And again, share your own research. Use stats to inform and educate, instead of as a hammer. And I learned many great things from Wendy Nather when she hired me into 451 Research, where we were basically doing this all day. We were thought leaders. We were writing stuff, talking about the industry, what's going on with it, where things are headed, trends, and learn many things. But one of the best is basically what I'm talking about today. Make sure it's defensible. Make sure that the stuff you're putting out there is something that if somebody challenged, you'd be comfortable defending it. You've got the data behind it. You've got a source behind it that you trust. Just be prepared for that in every case. And she's great about backing me up when I wasn't talking out my ass. And once or twice talked out of my ass, and we had this conversation. She was like, look, I'll back you up, but make sure what you're saying isn't bullshit. And back in those days, I would just get terribly excited about something. I'd start putting something together, start putting my rant onto the page, and back then would forget to shore it up and make sure that it was defensible. So that's, if you take nothing else away, that's one of the best things I learned from Wendy. And the truth is interesting and worth it. And I don't know why we ended with a cassowary. We got away from the ostriches somehow. Maybe I ran out of ostrich pictures, but now we're in cassowaries, which you got to admit it's a pretty badass looking cassowary. Look at that blue. Look at that horn. But yeah, it's worth it. Take the time to check your facts and figures. Let your friends know if their company's marketing is using fake stats. Try to handle it quietly, at least at first. And yeah, let's get into if there's any questions, anything like that. I'm sorry I didn't work in a Letterkenny reference. I only found out about that recently. I still haven't watched Letterkenny. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I love that somebody did the math. All right, I'll wait a few minutes for questions here if there aren't any. Let me see if I can drag out some of these links and post them in the chat here. So the bit.ly destroyed by breach. I think that's what that link was. Yep, that's it. So that's my, it's just a Google sheet, but it's all the research I've done on companies that have gone out of business due to a cyber event. So it's something that you can point to if you do have that, if you do see somebody talking about that and you need to challenge them on it or educate them on it, you can use that link. Eventually I'll get it into a proper website. Have there been any stats that looked unbelievable but turned out to be true? That's a very good question. Looked too good to be true. Yeah, I think initially when I saw just just how quickly and easily people will, yeah, like some of the BEC stuff, the business email compromise. When we first started seeing that, and the attackers would just send an email that said, "Hey, here's the new bank account. Send the 40 million here instead." I was like, that's got to be like rare. Like people that can't happen all the time. That's one that I was shocked about, and that one is not quite an order of magnitude. I think 6 times bigger than ransomware losses, the direct losses from business email compromise. Just somebody saying, "Hey, transfer the money here instead." Way bigger losses than ransomware or extortion attacks. So that's certainly one that I don't know. I've never worked in finance. I thought there were more checks than that. I didn't think just sending an email could get millions of dollars redirected into a, I figured they were using some kind of system that said, "Hey, you're sending this to the Cayman Islands. Is that what you're expecting? Or are you sending this to Cyprus?" I figured there'd be like some kind of routing number check in there, because all the routing numbers are all bank routing numbers are pretty easy to look up. You can see exactly what bank it's going to. But apparently all it takes is an email, and that was hard for me to believe. What say you to the statistics about the cybersecurity worker shortage? Um, well, I mean, it's out there, right? Like the job sites, and again, on the worker shortage, there is proper research and data on this. I haven't hunted it down myself in a while. I think the last time I did was back in 2016, 2017, and it was off by like an order of magnitude. Take a zero away, so from 350 million down to 350,000, or not 3.5 million down to 350,000. I don't know if the discrepancy is still that big, but some of the reporting I've seen has shown it in steady decline over the years, because we've got a ton more people coming into InfoSec than we used to. But the data's out there. That is something that that you could put together and validate. Do you see this getting better? So, I mean, that's why I do this talk. It's and that's why I put together this research. I hope the little bit that I can increase awareness makes it a little bit harder to throw out a fake stat. Honestly, I've seen it change. I see my stuff cited on a pretty regular basis. I'd say probably once a month, advancing to even sometimes every couple of weeks. I see somebody citing this stupid Google spreadsheet I have, which makes me happy. And that's why I say it's really important that if you go do this work, make sure it's shareable. Make sure somebody can point to it and say, "Hey, actually that's not correct, or that's not accurate." And sometimes people come to me and say, "Hey, is this something you've researched? Is this a fake stat? Is this legit?" So I think if more of us do that, then it can have an impact. But I didn't mention the name of that company, but that company's still out there. They still make a lot of money, and they still get a lot more visibility than I do. What sources make you cringe? Well, I'll go ahead and say the name of the company is Cybersecurity Ventures. So Steve Morgan and Cybersecurity Ventures are fully dedicated to promoting fake stats. Maybe some of them aren't fake, but so many of them I've validated to be fake. I just assume they're all fake at this point. I don't even waste my time with them anymore. There's no methodologies. There's no raw data behind any of their stuff. But a lot of slick PDFs and uh, media posts, Forbes, bylines, stuff like that. They know how to make it look good. That's what they do. Also, Cybercrime Magazine is one of the other names they go by. Anything from KnowBe4? They've used some of these bad stats in the past. I haven't looked recently. I haven't seen them using any of it recently, but yeah, people have pointed me to them using some of Cybersecurity Venture stuff in the past. A lot of people use Cybersecurity Venture stuff, and it's really hard to marketing is marketing is marketing. A lot of the people in marketing are not security folks. They doesn't occur to them that, there's this big issue with fake stats. So somebody needs to go tell them, hey, and again, this is one of my recommendations. Instead of just saying, hey, that's a lie, don't use it, come to them with an alternative, because ultimately, like, the marketing folks don't care. Okay, fine, it's a fake stat. Like, I still need something to promote this paper, this publication, this, whatever I'm promoting, so go to them with something better. Like, if you're going to tell somebody to take something down, just understand the marketing folks' position, that they still have to, it's their job to promote this thing, so don't leave them hanging and just say, don't use that anymore. Give them something better. Give something, a stat that you like. You can help them because you have that practitioner perspective. What would get me to click on something? Help them out. Seeing that we cyber criminals are stealing 15.7 Earths, what are you going to buy with your share? Yeah, it must be true if it's pretty. I'm not sure what soft education sessions are. You're going to have to help me out with that. I'm not familiar with that term. I mean, if this is recorded, I can put my slides out there. You can always point to the stuff that I've done on this to help educate folks. There's plenty of other myths that I haven't gone into. There's juice jacking is a great one. I thought about mentioning juice jacking. Absolutely no evidence that juice jacking has ever happened. And I kind of I've got a hot take on bringing burners to DEF CON also. I've never brought a burner to DEF CON, and I think whatever OPSEC security measures you take with your devices should work at DEF CON. Should work anyway. Okay, maybe you put your phone in airplane mode or something like that while you're physically there, but I don't think you should have to bring a whole separate device and then wipe it afterwards and burn it and throw it in the river. Water cooler trade, yeah, sure, like a lunch and learn, soft education, water cooler training sessions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it works. This kind of thing works better there because it's I don't know. Some people get uncomfortable about it, especially if your training material has some of these fake stats in it. Maybe a more formal setting isn't the right place to bring this up. Maybe you have to ease your company and your people into it and just kind of let word of mouth spread. Oh, did you know that that's actually a fake stat? That's it might be a better way to approach it. More, I talked early on about how I didn't have the most tact initially, and certainly tact I think helps in getting adoption. On again, you've been using this stat for 5 years. The sales guy in his slide deck, you can't just slam the truth in his face or her face. You gotta maybe take a more subtle route to get there. Let some people come to terms with it and save some face. Yeah, no, absolutely. Ego is a big part. I think ego is why Theranos happened. I think it's I think that's ego is a huge factor in this stuff, getting out of control. And just, I don't know, I can't imagine what it must feel like running something like cybersecurity ventures. And like, it's not like I haven't told Steve Morgan directly, hey, this is not true. Please stop using it. And I'm pretty sure at least 100 other people have too. Like, I don't know what's going through their heads. I don't, we need a psychologist for that. I don't know. Good questions. I like these questions. Yeah, how to bring this up, how to educate people on it. A lot of nuance there. Oh, the juice jacking thing. There was a thing at Shmoo from the NSA a few years back. I, you know, I've looked. So Bob Lord has really done the research on this. He's got a long blog post on juice jacking. There's absolutely no evidence of it ever happening. anywhere that any of us have been able to find over years. Was it possible on older Android phones, like back in the like Jelly Bean days and Kit Kat days? Maybe, but like, and maybe only if you had developer mode enabled, where you could get like you could use ADB by default over the USB cable the moment you plugged it in. But none of that is true on a modern phone. Like you can't just inject code into a smartphone because you're plugged into a rogue charger or something like that. Like that's a very well known attack surface.